Hi everyone, hope you're going well. Just wanted to drop in and do a bit of a video today. I've had a lot of stuff come up around trauma lately, around the subject of trauma. And I think the subject of trauma is a very interesting subject. And it's something that in the work that I do, that I deal with a lot, helping people to understand their trauma, understand what trauma does, how it affects you on a mental, emotional, and physical level, as well as, how to break free from the bonds of that past trauma. Because I think, in my experience, trauma can be very secretive. It can be very subversive. It can be very undermining in a lot of very unconscious or subconscious ways. And so often with trauma, we know what we feel when we experience those triggers related to past trauma, but oftentimes we don't understand the full extent of how it's actually limiting us in our life and impacting us and maybe keeping us stuck in that fight or flight response. And I think there's some really powerful things about trauma, that if we understand these things, that we can take back our power from those past experiences and stop allowing them to control our future. Now the thing is, when we're stuck in trauma, that we're not really in a creative mindset. We're in survival, so we're not able to see the possibilities anymore. We're not in the creative flow. We're not in a state of presence. We're not able to, it blocks us from experiencing love oftentimes because we're in fear. So fundamentally, when we're in trauma, it's a fear response. Now, there's lots of different types of trauma. I'm mostly referring to emotional trauma in this video. And so when we're in that fear response, that in the brain, shame and fear are very much the same neural pathways. There is no distinction between shame when we experience it and fear. They are fundamentally the same neural pathways in the brain and in the body. And they affect the brain and the body the same way. And so one of the interesting things that happens when we're in trauma is that our brain and our heart move out of synchrony. They move out of coherence. And we get a lot of, we go into what's called high beta brainwaves. Okay, so high beta brainwaves is high level stress, which means essentially that we become very disconnected to our bodies. Now, another thing that you experience as a result of trauma as well is a lot of brain noise. So a real strong signal that we're in high stress or high beta is that we have a lot of brain noise that we can't get rid of, or we can't get away from. So our mind is very busy, constantly running scenarios, caught in those negative mental tape loops, and it feels like we can't get out of it. And again, it can take just one thing in our environment to trigger that past memory. So what we have to really understand about trauma is that it is a past memory. It's not actually happening in the present. It happened in the past. It happened 3 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, when you're a child, whatever time it happened back then. But it is stored in the body, as a memory. It's stored in our physiology as a memory. And what happens is our body develops a clear picture, and our mind develops a clear picture of all of the sensory information that we experience as part of that painful experience. So we have a certain environmental things that become triggers. So if we had somebody that was yelling at us, and they were a tall person that was muscular, that had a big bushy beard, and we were maybe in a sitting in a chair in a particular house, our brain and our body and our mind will store all that sensory information, what we are seeing, what we are hearing, what we are feeling, physical sensations, pain. It will store that as part of the memory. And that memory, then whenever anything in our environment represents that initial sensory information that is related to that trigger, up comes that same feeling, that same association. So our body will start reacting to those external triggers, and it remyelinates, re-triggers that response in the brain and the body as if that trauma was happening again. And so essentially what happens is we get stuck in that cycle of trauma. It keeps recreating itself whenever anything in our environment represents, or anyone in our environment represents behavior or any sensory information that is related to or connected to that original trauma. And so we will actively, in our environment, subconsciously, we will start scanning for things that are potential threats that look like that original experience or feel like that original experience. Our subconscious will have almost like a safety scan in place, and it will do it unconsciously or automatically, because it's trying to protect itself from that experience again. Because remember what I said, fear and shame are the same neural pathways in the brain, even shame-based fear. So the brain is essentially it thinks that its survival is on the line, and the body does too. And so it's trying to protect itself from that experience. So it musters all of its resources, all of its energy to try and scan the environment to make sure that it can sense any of those things before they're going to happen, so it can protect itself or you from having that experience again. Now, the big problem with this is when we're stuck in that state of fear from trauma, we tend to have it takes up a lot of energy. Okay, we use a lot of energy because it keeps us stuck in that continual process of fight and flight. And it's like a continual loop, and it's like we're frozen in time back to that past experience. And the amount of energy that takes for the body is not designed to stay in fight or flight for long periods of time. It's only designed to stay in fight or flight for short periods of time, to get to safety, and then to go back to rest and relaxation. So the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight response, is also counteracted by the parasympathetic nervous system. So these two things counteract each other to create balance. Okay, so whenever we go into fight or flight, we eventually what happens is the parasympathetic nervous system has got to kick in to bring us back into rest, relaxation, digest, all those things we do when we feel safe, when we feel like it's okay. But if we constantly keep recreating that stress and keep re-triggering that stress from that past traumatic experience in our perception, and what's going to happen is that parasympathetic nervous system is not going to be able to activate, and we're going to stay stuck in that sympathetic nervous system, stuck in the fight or flight response, which means our digestion is going to get affected. Our life force energy is going to be overwhelmed. It's going to drain and deplete our energy system in our body, and we're going to feel exhausted. We're going to feel tired all the time. We're going to become numb. We're going to become disassociative, and there's going to be a lot of signs and symptoms. And the eventuation of trauma eventually can be disease in the body, which is a natural progression. When the body has no more life force energy left to draw on, it becomes diseased. And so we create health conditions that reflect our physiological, psychological, emotional response, which is part of that trauma that we're holding on to. So essentially, we have to understand how this mechanism works. And so in order to change that response, we have to become conscious of the fact that it's happening. So we have to have ways to look at these triggers. Instead of looking at triggers as something that we should avoid, we should look at them as something that we should explore and be curious about, because it's a way for us to go inward to reflect upon why we're still hanging on to that memory of the past. So if we find a lot of the traumas being triggered in life, we need to get curious about why that is. We need to get curious about when we created that trauma. When did it happen, and why are we still hanging on to it? What are our unconscious and conscious motives for hanging on to that traumatic experience? What are we trying to protect ourselves from? There's a lot of really powerful questions you can ask yourself to help initiate the healing process, and to start to detach and to disengage from that flight response, so that we can become, so that we can allow ourselves to be more compassionate and to heal our response from the past, to heal the cause essentially that's causing the effect, which a lot of times that cause is that past experience. And so one of the things we have to reflect upon is, how can we change our perspective of that past experience? Can we see some of the gifts and some of the positive things that came from that experience? Can we turn that, our perception of that experience around, so that we see not only one side of it, because oftentimes with trauma we see things as black or white, all or none. We don't see both sides. We don't see that when somebody was attacking us and maybe, making us feel bad and shaming us or putting us down or abusing us in some way, that there are also people that were protecting us at the same time, and that we were also getting supported and loved as well. We often only see it in a one-sided fashion. So being able to go back and seeing how those experiences served you, how those experiences allowed you to grow and learn and evolve, is also really important. Because fundamentally all experiences that we have are here to serve us on a higher level. They're here to serve our growth and learning. And often the most traumatic experiences are often the ones that are the most powerful as far as growth and learning, if we can learn to turn them around, if we can learn to see them from a higher perspective. And the way that we grow from those experiences is by recognizing their capacity to initiate learning and change, and also understanding that those experiences can actually be on the way, not in the way. So to give you a personal example, for me, I had a lot of trauma related to my childhood around expressing my vulnerabilities, about expressing my fears, about expressing my emotions. And I very much was people pleasing was a big thing for me, my go-to, because I didn't feel like I was good enough, like I had to be something for somebody else. And I always was trying to prove, please, perform, and perfect. That was my motto, to overcompensate for what I felt were my inadequacies relating to my trauma. As a result of that, I was stuck in shame, so I experienced depression and anxiety. But the irony is that when I started to get curious about that, and I started to unravel some of the trauma and to dissolve some of the pain of the past, and I was able to heal a lot of that, the very thing that was my deepest shame became my gift. So my sensitivity and my vulnerability, my capacity to have a rich emotional experience, that very thing that I was most scared of showing to the world became the very thing that was my gift, that allowed me to have the most fulfillment and the most reward, and have the most reward on an emotional level in my life, in the work that I do. And so it became the opposite of what I initially thought it would be, because my fear was running me. So my trauma essentially became the greatest gift in my life, because it initiated a journey for me to search and to find and explore my inner world, and to learn about myself, and to get to this place of healing the past. And I would not have explored and had that desire to search if I didn't have those experiences. And I would not be able to help people in the way that I help people right now if I had not have had that past experience and that trauma that catalyzed this learning and spiritual growth journey for me. And I am so grateful to this day for having all of those experiences, even the most painful, negative experiences that I had. I'm beyond grateful for that they have occurred in my life, because they are one of the greatest gifts in my perception now for me, because they allow me to help people navigate that that uncertainty of trauma, that the pain and the layers, and also the vulnerability and the fear that comes up with it. Without having to navigate through that myself, I would not have the capacity that I do to hold space for people and to make them feel safe in the exploration of that. And that gift only came through the initial challenge of having to overcome my own trauma, and to go back into it and to see how that trauma, that experience that I perceived as traumatic, actually was a great gift, and how it served me in my growth and learning, seeing the other side of the equation. So I hope that gives you a bit more of a holistic overview of trauma. And again, the big thing I want to help you understand in this video is that, you know, trauma is something that we all have in degrees. Nobody escapes it. But that can be turned into something beautiful if we learn to see it from a higher perspective. If we learn to see the perfection in it, how it serves us in our life, how it's initiated us onto an inner journey to find what's true for us, and to experience those things that are most important to us. So I hope that is a useful analogy, and I hope you get a lot out of that. Please like and subscribe, and please, put some comments in the section below, and share your experiences with it. What do you think about it? What are your thoughts? Love to hear all about that. So look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for being here.